Right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's A-Level Ethics Explainer. Today, we're going to break down what is arguably one of the most intense, heavyweight clashes in all of philosophy and theology: the epic battle between determinism and moral responsibility. Honestly, whether you're cramming for your exams or you're just genuinely fascinated by the whole concept of human freedom, this explainer is going to unpack exactly how our understanding of causality and predestination literally rewrites our ideas of right, wrong, and divine justice. Let's get into it.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're hitting the determinism dilemma, science and sleeping men, predestination with Augustine versus Calvin, defending a loving God, the moral illusion debate, and finally, evaluating the believer's choice.
Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, the determinism dilemma. Let's get our baseline definitions sorted out.
Picture this. You have absolutely zero room to maneuver. None. That is hard determinism in a nutshell. It argues that your life is completely 100% determined. We're talking factors like God's predestinating power, psychological behaviorism, your biology, or just universal causation. If hard determinism is actually true, you have absolutely zero control over any of your choices. I mean, really think about the implications of that for a second. Logically, it means you couldn't be blamed if you, say, stole your friend's smartphone, because you quite literally had no choice but to steal it. Under this framework, you are completely blameless. Crazy, right? Now, you're probably thinking, okay, well, what about a middle ground? Soft determinism kind of tries to be that, but there is a major catch. Classical soft determinism, championed by thinkers like Thomas Hobbes and A.J. Ayer, still fully accepts that your actions are 100% caused by determining factors. Their whole argument is just that you have free will as long as no one is physically stopping you from doing those predetermined things. But because the actions are still fundamentally caused by something else, our human ideas of right and wrong completely lose their value. It means normative ethics, like Jeremy Bentham's ACT utilitarianism, which relies entirely on a moral agent freely choosing the path of maximum happiness, might actually be entirely useless. If we trace this out, just follow the chain of causality here. A determining prior cause entirely dictates the human action, right? And that leads to the inevitable conclusion of absolutely no moral control, meaning moral responsibility. It just becomes a total illusion. It makes the idea of punishing people for immoral acts seem entirely unfair. In fact, if this framework holds true, blaming a human being for committing a crime is literally as nonsensical as blaming a goldfish for swimming around its bowl in circles. It's just what they're programmed to do. Moving right along to Section 2, Science and Sleeping Men. Let's look at the earthly evidence. This next bit is huge for your exams. The MAOA gene case is incredibly important scientific evidence. So back in 2007 in Italy, Abdelmalek Bayout murdered a man who had insulted him. Obviously guilty, right? But his sentence was actually reduced by a full year. Why? Because the judge accepted that Bayout possessed the MAOA genetic mutation, what scientists commonly call the warrior gene, and that this was a determining cause of his violence. This is a massive real-world example showing how biological determinism can actually reduce a person's legal and moral culpability. But hold on, let's flip it and look at the other side, with John Locke's famous sleeping man analogy. Locke asks us to imagine this. A man wakes up in a room, decides he wants to stay there, but he doesn't realize the door is actually locked from the outside. Locke argues the man isn't actually free because he literally couldn't have acted differently even if he wanted to. But let's evaluate this for a second. Critics point out that the man actually could have gotten up and checked the door. Our everyday human experience involves knowing our options, deliberating, and then choosing. That very feeling of freedom we experience when making a decision, that's a super powerful piece of evidence against strict determinism. All right, Section 3, Predestination, Augustine versus Calvin. Let's talk divine determinism. There is some serious theological tension between these two absolute titans of theology. On one side, you have Augustine. He argued that after the fall of Adam and Eve, humanity essentially became a massa peccati, a lump of sin. We became totally incapable of doing good on our own. However, he says an omnibenevolent God shows grace by saving a chosen elect through Jesus' atonement. But then on the other side, you have John Calvin's supporters at the Synod of Dort, pushing for something called unconditional election. This takes it a step further, meaning God alone chooses the elect based purely on his absolute omnipotent will, and he did this before the earth was even created. Both guys fiercely protect God's omnipotence, but they take slightly different paths to get there. Which brings us to Section 4, Defending a Loving God. The problem of evil is a big one here. So Jacobus Arminius steps into the ring right here as a major defender of God's character.
Arminius felt this urgent need to formulate his free will theory specifically to rescue the idea of God as a loving, caring parent. Because think about the dark implications of predestination for a minute. If God predestines all human life, he inherently has to take responsibility for all the moral evil humans carry out. We're talking horrific historical events like the Holocaust. Arminius argued forcefully for free will precisely so that God might not be considered the author of all sin, thereby preserving his omnibenevolence.
And on the flip side, we've got philosopher Bertrand Russell's completely atheistic take. Looking at the exact same concept of predestination, Russell argued that a God who predestines actions, essentially handpicking who is the elect and who is reprobate, and then turns around and punishes or rewards people for behavior he himself caused, well, Russell says that's nothing more than a monster. Punishing someone on the basis of your own eternal decisions is fundamentally deeply unfair and immoral.
Section 5. The moral illusion debate. Are we really responsible?
You'll definitely want to keep these points in your back pocket for your AO2 evaluations. On the determinist side, you've got universal causality, those MAOA genetics we talked about, and Pavlov's conditioning. But over on the libertarian side, defending free will, you've got the undeniable human experience of deliberation, Locke's man having the capacity to at least try the door, and Richard Swinburne's principle of credulity. Swinburne brilliantly suggests that if it genuinely seems to us that we are free when we make a choice, then frankly, we probably are.
But think about the sheer scale of the consequences if determinists are right and moral responsibility is just a mirage. Blaming people for crimes becomes completely valueless. Praising them is about as irrational as thanking a tree for swaying in the wind. Normative ethics entirely lose their purpose. However, there is an argument that perhaps we actually need this illusion. Without it, humanity might just be immobilized. We might require the illusion of moral responsibility just to ensure we make careful decisions, hold people accountable, and keep our legal systems and society functioning safely.
And finally, Section 6, Evaluating the Believer's Choice.
This right here is the ultimate dilemma if you're looking at this from a religious perspective. If a believer accepts predestination, they ensure God retains absolute, uncompromised omnipotence and omniscience. He is 100% in control. But by doing that, they risk making spontaneous prayer and miracles entirely pointless. I mean, if everything is pre-planned from the dawn of time, praying for a miracle, like, say, asking for time to stand still so you can finish an exam, is totally futile. Conversely, if they reject predestination, they protect God's omnibenevolent, loving nature and they preserve meaningful prayer. But they risk suggesting that humans actually have a power of choice that God somehow lacks.
So, let's wrap up with a thought that really strikes at the core of all this, challenging you to synthesize everything we've just covered for your exam. If an omniscient being already knows or has ordained your absolute final destination, do your daily moral choices hold any real weight whatsoever? Or are you just playing out a pre-written script? Think about whether human action truly matters in a predetermined universe and how you're going to argue that in your essays. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and definitely use these frameworks to build your own robust arguments. Catch you next time.